berserap gumising sa Good Morning Club.
Good morning to all you clubbers out there in TV land, and a good morning to you, Sarah.
Good morning, Adam.
We have a great show for you today, and you know what our mantra is?
Education rocks.
That's right, Sarah. Our special guest today comes all the way from Bristol, England, via the telephone, and calls himself a writer, a broadcaster, religious historian, environmentalist, and translator of Chinese classics. Acclaimed author of the Jesus Sutras. Let me introduce to you Martin Palmer.
Well, thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Martin. It's always a privilege to have you with us. I know that you are very passionate about this discovery. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
In the year 1625, workmen digging near the ancient capital of Xi'an in central China hit an enormous stone. When they excavated it, it turned out to be a stele. And a stele is essentially a vast slab of stone on which is carved an inscription, stories, accounts, details, and sometimes with decorative features. And these can measure up to 18 feet in height.
What particular things made it important?
This particular one is about 10 feet in height. And they noticed, first of all, that it wasn't entirely written in Chinese. There was another language carved on it as well, of which they had absolutely no idea what it was. But when they began to read it, when they took it to the local magistrate and he read it, he began to realize that the description of the religion that was carved on this great stone bore some sort of relationship to the religion that he was hearing about in Beijing from the Jesuits, who had arrived in China a mere 25 years before. And so he sent a rubbing of this stone to Beijing to the Jesuits, and it caused absolute mayhem.
Oh, yes, Martin, you had a card. And why is that, Martin?
Because what had been dug up was a stone that had been carved in the year 781, but which was referring to events that took place exactly 1,000 years before.
And so this stele gave evidence of early Christianity in China, is that correct?
The Church of the East was a missionary church that had no imperial power behind it whatsoever. It wasn't like Rome. In fact, it had been massively persecuted in the Persian Empire and had survived. And indeed, if you wanted an example of a church that grew out of the blood of the martyrs, then the story of the Church of the East is quite phenomenal. But in the year 635, Bishop Alopen arrived in China and was formally greeted by the emperor. And he brought with him the teachings of Christianity. He brought with him a range of books, many books of which have disappeared in their original language of Syriac or indeed Greek, and are only now to be found in the Chinese translations that we have rediscovered in the last 100 years in China. And this religion, which the Chinese call the religion of light, spread throughout China incredibly rapidly, so that within 150 years, when the stele was carved to celebrate its success, they were claiming on the stone that there was a church in every single county of China. In other words, 3,000 churches stretched across China.
That's really quite astonishing, Martin. What does this stone look like exactly?
The stone itself is beautifully carved. It's mounted on a turtle, because the turtle is a symbol of the sacred and the divine. At the top of the stone is a fascinating carving of the cross. And it's the cross rising out of a lotus, combining Buddhist and Christian iconography, because the lotus symbolizes the Buddhist notion that truth and reality rises out of the muddy depths of this world, and just as the lotus flowers when it reaches the sunlight coming out of the muddy waters, so truth and spirituality flourishes when it reaches the light of God, or the light of the Buddha. But also around this cross are Taoist symbols from the traditional religion of China. And these symbols symbolize the influences of yin and yang. Yin and yang are the two great cosmic forces of Chinese mythology. They are not moral forces, they're not good and bad, they're not positive and negative, but they are, for example, yin is the moon, and the earth, and water, and winter, and feminine, and yang is the sun, and fiery, and hot, and male. And these two forces are the forces that created the universe. And the cross is therefore held in a Buddhist lotus, surrounded by Taoist imagery, but is unequivocally a Christian cross. And this is what the whole stele is about. It is about the most phenomenal and exceptional encounter between Christianity and two, in fact, three of the world's great religions, because Confucianism is also a factor in China and was referred to on the stone. It is the most phenomenal encounter between Christianity and three great ancient religious traditions: Buddhism, Confucianism, and especially Taoism.
Now, besides the obvious, are there any other interesting things that would be of importance to the early church in the East?
The stone itself describes Christianity, describes the fundamental teachings of Christianity, but does so using Taoist and Buddhist language and occasionally Confucianist language. So, for example, there is no notion whatsoever on this stone, as indeed there was no notion in the Church of the East, of original sin. Quite the reverse. What the stone talks about is original goodness or original nature, which becomes clouded and dusty and besmeared with stupidity and greed and so on and so forth. But essentially it's saying human beings are essentially good. Secondly, it says that we have been given responsibility to protect nature, not to dominate it, not to manipulate it, but to protect it. Thirdly, and this is quite unique for China, where Buddhist monasteries, for example, ran on slavery, that's how they managed to function. It says that the Christians of China of the 7th, 8th, and indeed right through into the 9th and 10th centuries would not have slaves. They also treated men and women as equal. In fact, there's a very famous text that has been discovered in China, which is a retelling of the resurrection appearance, when Christ appears to the women first, before the male disciples. And the text says, in this way, Christ showed that women were no longer to be treated as inferior because of the actions of Eve, and that they had been forgiven for the actions of Eve, and were now to be seen as equals with men. This is a text written, in fact, in the 8th century AD in China. So this amazing stone, dug up in 1625, now on permanent display in what was the old Confucianist temple of Xi'an in Shaanxi province, goes on to then tell us about the life of Christ, how he was born in Daqian, which is the Chinese word for the Roman Empire, or basically for any empire in the West. It describes the coming of the Magi, who of course came from Persia, and for the Church of the East, the fact that people from their own background came to worship Jesus before almost anybody else other than the shepherds. This was a wonderful affirmation that the Church of the East was specially blessed.
Lastly, a big question about stele. Where did it originate?
The stone itself, we now know where it once stood, because in 1998 I had the great fortune of discovering the last remaining fragment of the second oldest church in China, built in the year 650, a magnificent pagoda, which is now being turned into a major center for the study of Christianity in China in the Tang dynasty, the dynasty that ruled from 609 to 909 AD. And what is so astonishing about this stone is that it tells us all about Christianity. It tells us about the arrival of Christianity in China and its success. But it does so in some of the most beautiful lyrical Chinese of the Tang dynasty. Now, the Tang dynasty is considered to be the highest point of Chinese literary accomplishment. The poems of the Tang dynasty are considered to be the greatest poems ever written in Chinese. And this was written by a monk called Jingjing, whose Christian name was Adam, but he was Chinese. And we are now recognizing that not only is this a magnificent historical document about the fact that the Church of the East reached China and became a major religious force in China, which we had not really appreciated before this stone was found and other documents. but were also appreciating that what the church in China achieved was that it managed to produce poets and writers whose poetry and writing, their prose, is now counted amongst the greatest treasures of Chinese civilization. I can think of no other object anywhere in the world that tells such a story of encounter between different beliefs and different cultures, and in which Christianity, in a space of 150 years, makes a major contribution.
Well, thank you, Martin. Have a great day.
Thank you and God bless.
And up next, we have Education Rocks.
We went into the wild and found some kiddos to see how they interpreted some of these lyrical writings in What the Heck Are These Kids Saying? Yeah. Oh. The great law is now the heavenly wheel of returning to you.
That means there's turning clouds to you, and there's turning music and turning animals. Like God's love and Jesus' love. It's to turn around. God.
Like heaven.
Yeah. Jesus.
Yeah.
It goes all the way around.
Oh. The law of compassion saves us all, echoing through the world like a trolling golden bell.
A trolling? How about it's a troll?
Yeah?
And the trolls don't let the goats go on their bridge or people. What is it? A golden bell.
A golden bell.
What is a golden bell? Like a golden bell?
Yeah?
Like a golden bell you can ring. The trolls can ring when the goats come.
Ways bring us clarity and kind-hearted mercy. Now I draw close to our holy, compassionate Father, the one who creates salvation. See the angelic spirits crossing the ocean of Dharma. What?
It means that the dad have never been to Karma before. Get some new socks.
I will tell you a story. There was a sick man who heard people talk about his precious mountain. Day and night he longed to reach it. The thought never left him. But the mountain was high and miles away, but he was very crippled. He longed to realize his dream, but he couldn't. He had a close relative who was wise and resourceful, and this man had scaling ladders brought up and steps cut, and with some friends, he levered and pushed the sick man up until he reached the summit, and there he was healed.
Maybe when he got up to the hill, he healed himself.
Right?
Because his dream came true. That means you're better and you can be up at morning.
Supreme King, will of of ages, compassionate, joyous Lamb. Loving all who suffer, fearless as you strive for us. Free us from the karma of our lives. Bring us back to our original nature, delivered from all danger.
Cool. I don't know. It's a sheep. It's the stuff that grows outside. Oh, it's happiness. Yeah. It's hunting.
Hunting?
No, it's not. And bugs.
Everything looks to you without thinking. Shower us with your healing rain.
Let's see. Maybe a baptism?
Do you think that rain ever heals anything?
No,
No.
because rain makes the flowers grow.
Wasn't that great, Adam?
That was something, Sarah.
So good.
That's all we have time for today, though. I want to thank our special guest, Martin Palmer, and the Good Morning Club Band.
And remember, this program was brought to you by MTSO, where the kids go.
Super set out.